Please turn off any cell phones. And when we come to questions and answers, please no lectures. You're here to ask questions only, and you'll be reminded of that if you get off track. And we'll have mics here, one on each aisle, for you to use so that people can understand your question. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. I won't try to give all their qualifications because you have it in your bios there. And first, we will have Philip Walker. Secondly, Joe Cerancione. Joe, is that close?
Close enough.
All right. And third is Ike Wilson. So with no further ado, since we have so much to discuss, Phil, why don't you start off?
Thank you, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. I must say, I'm floored by the turnout for this panel. Ike and I were here together on discussing Afghanistan this morning, and we had quite a large group then, and I think this is even larger. But I guess it's appropriate, given the importance of Pakistan in many ways, both positive and negative, to the United States, and the interest that we should be taking in this country. As I was thinking about how to tackle this topic, I guess it's pretty straightforward to talk about why might Pakistan in fact be the world's most dangerous place. I think we could talk all day about whether it is the most dangerous or is there someplace else where, that's worse or better or whatever. But I think it's fair to say that it's a very important and dangerous place. Why? For starters, we're talking about a major country here. In terms of population, economic impact, strategic location. This is one of the world's emerging potentially great regional powers, with a tremendous regional impact, both positive and negative, and tremendous potential for the future. Secondly, we have to remember the historic rivalry between India and Pakistan, the region's other superpower or emerging, possibly even global superpower within the next century, that has the ongoing potential for extraordinary catastrophic conflict should that rivalry spin out of control at some point in the future. Thirdly, Pakistan has the bomb. We as a nation have expended an extraordinary amount of effort and political capital to prevent Iran from getting the bomb. Yet Pakistan has achieved that special club with relatively little controversy in recent years. Yet the potential negative consequences of Pakistan having the bomb are tremendous when you consider the nature of the neighborhood, the rivalry with India, the potential for instability that exists in Pakistan. Another reason why Pakistan is an extraordinarily dangerous place is it is playing a dangerous game in Afghanistan. And this is something I'd be happy to talk about at more length during the question and answer. I consider myself more of an Afghan hand than a Pakistan hand, actually. But for the United States right now, we really have to focus on what Pakistan's game is in Afghanistan. I mean, those of us who are gleaning information either from the public media or from the course of our work don't necessarily know the full extent of Pakistani involvement with the Afghan Taliban, which factions necessarily they may or may not be supporting, to what extent they may or may not be supporting them, and what their price may be to support peace and Afghanistan. But this has tremendous implications for Afghanistan and has tremendous implications for the U.S. role in Afghanistan. And last but not least, I just want to address, and perhaps my colleagues will talk about in more length, the unsettling indications of instability in recent years in Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan has had a troubled governance history throughout its lifespan, with a revolving door, if you will, between elected governments and military governments, often with military officers pulling the strings behind the scenes during periods of elected rule. The special role of the Pakistani intelligence, the ISI, in Pakistani society. Pakistan has been at various times described as a military with a country attached to it, rather than vice versa. And I think there is some truth, at least, to that. In recent years, there's been both positive signs and very negative signs. I think the 2009 lawyers and judges, I won't call it a revolt, but agitation to bring a civilian government back into power and to put the on-again, off-again Supreme Court justice back into the court is a very positive indicator of the vibrancy of Pakistani civil society and the ferocity with which members of Pakistani civil society will promote and defend democratic structures. At the same time, that zeal has not translated into sound governance necessarily. And we have continued to see the growth and the impact of the Pakistani Taliban all across Pakistan, such that the insurrection that has existed has escalated to the level of near civil war in some parts of the country. And the pressures of the Afghan war upon Pakistan are serious and increasing, such that while many people may support the drone program and the drone strikes inside of Pakistan because of their effectiveness in removing safe havens for the Afghan Taliban, one must question what it is doing to Pakistan in the meantime. Are we simply mitigating or ameliorating one problem by creating another problem in another locale? So I'll just throw those out for public discussion, and I'll wrap up my very short presentation with a personal anecdote that it's not in any way a scientific assessment of the situation in Pakistan, but it certainly does frame my thinking. I was in Pakistan in 2009 for a period of time doing some work for the European Commission. I was doing a close study of certain aspects of the Pakistani judicial system. And I've been doing legal and judicial reform work in some pretty rough places around the world, and I had pretty low expectations when I started looking at the Pakistani scene, and I was frankly shocked. I just to give you one small anecdote, I was looking at the patterns by which individuals may find themselves in the docket charged with crimes, why they might land in jail, how long they spend in jail, and the quality of the trials that they may or may not receive down the road. And I found widespread abuse of police powers for personal gain, so much so that I would not hesitate to say it is the dominant paradigm, that essentially someone is charged with a crime because someone else fingers them either for a personal reason or no reason. The police will or will not act, at least in the provinces that I looked at, overwhelmingly on the basis of personal grudge or whether or not they get paid. The individual will either rot in jail or not rot in jail for long periods of time based upon whether they can afford to pay their way out of jail. And at the end of years in incarceration, 85 to 90% of those individuals will be acquitted at court for lack of evidence. And sort of the impression that I came away with after this little study was that if the individuals were not anti-government insurgents when they went into jail, they sure would be when they came out of jail. And then the second anecdote in a similar vein, when I was wrapping up this particular gig in Pakistan, I got it into my head that I wanted to talk my way into a jail. Not on an official visit, but just sort of get in and have a look around without any handlers or anything like that. And so I went down to the Rawalpindi lockup around closing time, and I just sort of hung around and started chatting with the guard, who, to my surprise, invited me in without hesitation. Gave me a tour of the place and started pointing to individuals. I mean, this was not the long-term prison. This was the lockup. This is where individuals who were being held prior to trial would be brought every 2 weeks or so they could go in front of a magistrate and have their indefinite detention confirmed indefinitely. And started pointing to individuals in groups and saying, well, this guy's been doing this for 5 years now. He did nothing wrong. This guy's been doing this for 8 years now. He did nothing wrong. This guy's been doing this, Ahmed, how long have you been doing this? 5 years. He did nothing wrong. At one after the other after the other. Now, I have no idea if any of this is true. But if this is the guy who runs the lockup telling me this, the guy who runs the lockup speaking to me in his broken English, telling me somebody has to do something about this, that set some alarm bells off for me. And this one experience characterized my impression of Pakistan, I'm afraid, somewhat towards the negative, but I hope that my colleagues will disabuse me of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a terrific way to set the stage for this. I have to give a disqualifier here. I am a member of the Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board, and one of the areas that we are asked to look at is Pakistan. I have to tell you, it is by far the most difficult policy problem we're examining, in a world of difficult policy problems. But my comments today represent my views and my views alone, and not the views of the board or any agency of the U.S. government, nor are my comments based on any of the briefings that I've received as a member of that board. If you've heard me talk about this at some of our panels this year or in previous years, you know that I'm very clear and unequivocal on this. I believe Pakistan is the most dangerous country on earth. This is a far greater threat to the United States than Iran or North Korea or any of the other nuclear threats you hear discussed. I say this because Pakistan already has enough nuclear material for 100 nuclear bombs. It's building more nuclear weapons at a faster rate than any other country on earth. It has a chronically unstable government. It has radical fundamentalist Islamic influences deep inside the military and intelligence apparatus of the country. It has a plethora of terrorist groups located inside its national territory, including the headquarters of Al-Qaeda and now the Afghanistan Taliban, among others. In fact, experts can't really count all the terrorist groups that find safe haven in the rugged northern territories of Pakistan. The issue for the United States, the strategic interests that the United States has in Pakistan are many, but the overriding security interest of the United States is preventing a destabilization of the Pakistani government that will result in the loss of control over the nuclear materials or nuclear weapons inside Pakistan. I believe this is a real and present danger. It's not an issue of the security of the weapons themselves. These are the crown jewels of the Pakistani military. We have every reason to believe the Pakistani military when they tell us that these are the most safely guarded assets of the government. The question isn't the security of the weapons, it's the security of the government. What happens if the government fails? What happens if the army splits? Who gets the weapons? Who gets the scientists who know how to build the weapons? Who gets the material for the weapons? I am concerned about the attacks on Pakistani military installations that we've seen in the past few years. Just last year, there was an attack on the Karachi Naval Base that lasted for over 24 hours. So a naval base, a heavily guarded military installation, insurgents attack it, and the battle lasts for 24 hours. Over a dozen people are killed. The attack clearly showed evidence of insider knowledge of the base, of the networks of the facilities. Many terrorist groups have camps, we know, that are located dozens of kilometers away from sites we believe are storage areas for nuclear weapons. Where there's fear that there could be insider help, so in allowing a group to gain access to these weapons. But the scenario that some people fear the most, and I share this, is sort of a combination of the two main nuclear threats we face. So the two threats are, one, the nuclear weapons are stolen, and a terrorist group gets their hands on it and use it, or two, that there is a conflict between India and Pakistan that results in a war that escalates to the nuclear level. And the real danger might be the nexus of those two. That is, 4 years ago now, November 2008, we saw one of these terrorist groups, Lashkar-e-Taiba, stage an attack on the Indian city of Mumbai. We know for a fact now, although it was denied at the time, that they were being guided by elements of the Pakistani intelligence service. We know this, that they were in radio communication with Pakistani intelligence service agents while they were conducting the terrorist attack, and were being told what was going on outside, what hotel to go to, whether they should kill the hostages they had seized or not, which they did. The purpose of that attack was not just to terrorize India, not just a tit for tat, not just a strike at India. It was to provoke a war. That was the aim of the terrorist group that launched the attack. They failed. India showed remarkable restraint in not responding to that. The fear is that there could be a similar attack in the future with a slightly different aim. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine right now uses nuclear weapons to compensate for India's overwhelming conventional superiority. There's little doubt that if there actually was a war between India and Pakistan, India could more or less quickly invade Pakistani territory. The Pakistanis know this. They copy the military doctrine that we had during the Cold War, when we believed the Soviets had overwhelming conventional superiority in Europe. In order to compensate for that, we deployed thousands of tactical nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons we intended to use on the battlefield, so tactical they're called. We would use them within tens of miles or hundreds of miles, not spanning oceans, but to fight tank warfare. The Pakistanis have adopted that strategy. They say, yeah, that was pretty good. You guys were right. We're doing the same thing. We're going to compensate for our conventional inferiority by using the tactical nuclear weapons, and they are starting to deploy and manufacture battlefield nuclear weapons. In order to use battlefield nuclear weapons, they can't be in the depots. You've got to get them to the battlefield. So in case of a crisis, the doctrine calls for the mobilization of these nuclear assets. So the fear is that a terrorist group would stage another Mumbai for the purpose of provoking a confrontation that would flush the nuclear weapons out of the secure bases and make them an easier target for terrorist groups to intercept and steal. Now, this sounds like real James Bond type movies, Mission Impossible type movies, but this is real. This is real. We believe that people are thinking like this, are developing strategies like this. And it's not at all clear what you would do about this. when you try to figure out how do you prevent a terrorist group in Pakistan from getting this, there is no U.S. military solution to this. You can't send in the 82nd Airborne to go secure the weapons. In case of war, let's mobilize, they all come in, helicopters that, no. First of all, we don't know where the storage sites are. Pakistan does not tell us that. Second, this is not a matter, this wouldn't be a cooperative venture. The Pakistani army would not be welcoming our assistance. The Pakistanis actually believe that the number one threat to their nuclear weapons are not the terrorists, they think it's us. They think it's us. So they won't tell us the nut of the nuclear information, where they are, how they're secured, whether there's permissive action links that would prevent their unauthorized use. So you'd have to fight through the Pakistani army to get to these weapons to secure them. So that's just impossible. There is no military solution to this. So when you start to play this game, when you start to game this out, well, how do we do this? Well, the only solution to this is twofold. One, you got to stop Pakistan from making more nuclear weapons. You got to get them to shrink the arsenal that they have, and you have to create conditions in Pakistan that discourage the development of terrorist groups, lower the appeal of these groups, lower the kinds of frictions inside a society that give rise to these groups. That's a tall order. That's a tall order. I mean, one of the reasons this is such a hard policy issue is that we have screwed up Pakistani relations for so long under both Democrats and Republicans that it's going to take us years to get into a position where we might be able to deal with this nuclear security problem, which is the overriding U.S. national security agenda. So we better start. We better start. And here, I'm going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. If you've listened to me over the days or weeks, you know that I am an optimist. I'm a realistic optimist. I look at this problem, and this is as bad a problem as exists in the nuclear field, and I believe we know how to solve this. And I believe that we're beginning to put ourselves down that road where we can solve this. And let me tell you there's two elements that people are working on now. Number one is improve India and Pakistan relations. This Sunday, for the first time in 7 years, the Pakistani president visited India. There was a very cordial, low expectations, high outcome visit between President Zardari and Prime Minister Singh of India in New Delhi. It actually is already starting to ripple out. The Pakistani president went back and freed some political prisoners that have been held for a long time. You're seeing there's talk now about easing a variety of rules and regulations between India and Pakistan, promoting India-Pakistan trade. One of the reasons this is happening is because of the business elites in both countries. Not because they want to solve the nuclear problem, not because they think this is the way to go, let's get over all this 60 years of tension and division. No, they want to make money. They want to make money. And that is a very powerful motivating force. And there is a lot of money to be made on India-Pakistan trade, and both sides are seeing that, and you're starting to see trade just mushroom in the adjoining provinces of India and Pakistan. For the first time, there was an Indian trade show inside Pakistan just last month. Very well attended, a lot of interest. So you're starting to see this happen. And this is now the path that many policy experts are looking as to how you improve how you foster democracy in Pakistan, how you reduce the role of the military, how you improve economic conditions. It's not some massive U.S. aid program, it's trade with Pakistan. There's some very simple steps we could take. Number one, we could reduce the tariffs on Pakistani textiles. We could make it easier for Pakistan to sell product to the United States. That by itself would be an economic boom for Pakistan that could start to create the kinds of economic conditions that can be the basis for greater political participation, loosening up of some of the authoritarian rules the government has, and maybe even start to address some of the judicial issues that you've heard described. So it's that It's that for very practical, selfish reasons, you're starting to see trade both between India and Pakistan and consideration of improving the trade relations between U.S. and Pakistan as a first step, as the signs that we're starting to address the root causes of the instability in Pakistan and lay the foundation for a more modern, more secure relationship between India, Pakistan, the United States, and China. I'll close there.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I've had a interesting day. Start the morning off with a little bit of Afghanistan, and then I jump over to have a grapple with religion and politics. Get a little lunch, even though I've lost my appetite by that time. And then here we are, and I'm batting third, and I'm only going to add to the. I'm going to try to add, unfortunately, to the darkness that's kind of been laid out by my colleagues. So I wore the black shirt for a reason today, just because I kind of woke up inheriting a dark mood today. I've got to give this very similar disclaimer. As you all know, I'm an active duty military officer, and so I'm here speaking, and what I'm going to offer you are my own thoughts as an individual. I'm in no way, form, representing an official policy, representing an official DOD or any other federal agency. Speaking to you as a citizen, I will, again, as I always say, as part of this disclaimer, I will answer your questions and concerns as to the utmost of my knowledge and ability to do so. If I don't give you an answer, I'll give you the explanation why, and it's typically because of some type of operational security issue or something that would pull me as an active duty military across a Rubicon, a line into partisan political politics, which is just, you don't want me there. And I don't want to go there. Gosh, this is really a continuation, a sequel, at least from my standpoint as the military guy. And inevitably, I'm going to be adding to what Phil and Joe have laid out to you. Some of the complications, some of the questions, some of the concerns that make Pakistan the most dangerous country in the world, inevitably from the military perspective. So from that perspective, my comments are really a sequel, a continuation. I'll begin today in my comments on Pakistan where I left off really with my comments on Afghanistan, because that's really been my experience with Pakistan. And Pakistan for me, particularly as a military officer, is largely a black box, a very complicated box. Part of the complication that Phil and Joe lay out here, part of the brittleness of this relationship, the U.S. with Pakistan, is illustrated by the complete, absolute, 1,000% non-permissive environment that is Pakistan, particularly for U.S. military. That ground is about as anti-American military, use whatever anti-language you could use, not even a possibility of getting a foot, a toe, certainly not by invitation, into that space, into that country. And for lots of complicated causes, some of which we frankly have contributed to, a lot of which we've contributed to. Part of my story on Afghanistan, the puzzle of Afghanistan, is part of the answer to why we've been there for 11 years in Afghanistan by one-year increments. Not based on an 11-year plan, but 11 years based on 1 year stumbling forward. There's a big difference there. I don't have to illustrate that any further. But one of the conversations that we have not really had in a useful, transparent way when it comes to the question of why and whither Afghanistan is because it's really about, again, my personal opinion, it's really about Pakistan. It's always been about Pakistan. Not that we don't care about Afghanistan, and of course what initially drew us into Afghanistan was a defensive war response to actionable intelligence that gave us clear indication that the progenitors of the strikes on 9/11 came from Al-Qaeda in sanctuary in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. safe havened and sanctuaried by the Taliban government who was running at the time Afghanistan. But beyond that, really the existential problem, if you will, for the United States, and that, frankly the international community, even though many of the members may not put it as high on their list of concerns, is a strong justification, perhaps the strongest, for why we have been in Afghanistan for 11 years by one-year increments, and probably why we'll still be there for another 25 to 30 years in some form or fashion. Has little to do with Afghanistan proper, but Afghanistan is the closest way and means towards managing or trying our best to manage the problems that come from within and without Pakistan itself. Again, because of this non-permissive environment, particularly for traditional security, military type operations in a posture. With that, I want to share again, I'm going to pile on here, some of the complications. I don't need to revisit the history, but for me, this tragic story begins with, particularly from a military standpoint, from a young it's interesting things that young lieutenants can get you in trouble with. And a young lieutenant by the name of Durand, British lieutenant, who was told to get the maps right. And what the young lieutenant does with a couple of hours probably of map 101 topography lessons, so he takes a marker, a grease marker, and he does what anyone would do at that point in their military career. They would find the valleys between the highest points in the topography, and they draw a line, right? And that becomes the Durand line, right? And now Lieutenant Durand lives in infamy, right? And we suffer in the persistence of this mismatch between Western liberal political boundaries that define, in Western liberal political terms, Westphalian, if you will, terms, a country called Afghanistan, territorially separated and distinguished by a country called Pakistan, but that not marrying up with other forms of political boundaries. I would offer the more legitimate ones, the more long-standing, the 3 to 6,000 year old long-standing political boundaries, which speak more to the kin-based relationships, the familial relationships, the clan and tribal boundaries. We face a similar disconnect. It took us about 6 or 7 years before we started respecting tribal boundaries in Iraq and reworking our Western liberal political boundaries in the definition of the problem space, if you will, in matching that up with the real legitimate boundaries, the tribal boundaries in Iraq. Very similar story here. It's the thing that has suffered every so-called empire, as we understand why this space, Afghanistan, Pakistan, is and has been the graveyard of empires, right, for millennia. From the U.S. perspective, the real problem lies within what some, and I don't actually like the term, but some actually call Pashtunistan, right? And so you have, I wish I had a map. We should always have a map on these things, but I'll go mirror image here. You've got Afghanistan, you've got Pakistan, but really when you look at U.S. in, concerns and vital national interests when it comes to concerns with Al-Qaeda and any other affiliated networks, terrorist networks with global, trans-regional and global reach capability. The problem really is not this and this, it's the connective tissue here, right? And right in the middle is, of course, Lieutenant Durand's line, right? And that is also the federated tribal areas, right? Really undergovernable, ungoverned space. There's where all the questions of territorial sovereignty and control, both on the Afghan side and as well as on the Pakistan side. That is the space, the Pashtun Belt, in this tribal space between Afghanistan and Afghanistan that has presented the U.S. with its pickle one-year increments for 11 years now and running. Trying to marry that up and match that is a predicament that, and really the limits of my knowledge and experience with Pakistan is starting in 2009 when I was brought over to try to operationalize and put into form President Obama's new strategy for the war in Afghanistan. And part of the very important part of the new strategy was redefining the space. Not until 2009 in the new administration did we finally recognize that it's a combined problem space of Afghan Pakistan. So it was remarks, the 27 March 2009 remarks by the president was remarks on a new strategy towards Afghanistan Pakistan. The reality of that is really, if you're looking to show the emphasis of vital national security interests first, and then perhaps close second, part A, part B, it's actually a more effective labeling of a strategy for Pakistan, Afghanistan. Afghanistan kind of being a ways and means towards the most important vital national interests, which is all these complications that Philip and Joe have done a better job than I could in laying out, defining the puzzle, the complex puzzle of and around Pakistan. Share a couple other concerns I have that leave me awake at night when it comes to Pakistan and Afghanistan, particularly Pakistan. Philip touched on this. It's this reality of strong army, weak state, right? And Joe laid out perfectly the concerns with this architecture, this reality in the nuclear situation, the nuclear weapons situation. But in addition to that, and I'm not discounting my concerns and the vital concern with the nuclear weapons, I have additional concerns, and again, I'm only speaking to you individually here. I'll get in real big trouble with the military if they think I'm representing them on this one. You not only have a strong army, but you have a very complicated army. And I'm very concerned with what we don't know in terms of the degree of discipline and organizational, doctrinal, professional, ethos-based control that the officer corps of the Pakistani army predominantly has over the enlisted corps, the enlisted soldier corps. Because again, this is where the real affinities and the real identities come into bear. And if you think about it, it depends, particularly with the enlisted soldiers within the Pakistani army, a lot of those enlisted soldiers come from that federated tribal area. They are Pashtun and they have affiliations with Quetta Taliban. So we really don't know, if we're really blunt and honest about it, the degree to which we can rely on the Pakistani officer corps to control their own soldiers. So we have a potential problem with a loss of control not only of the nuclear weapons, but in combination with the loss of the major working element of the army itself. Right? This is part of the reasons why we've been having fitful challenges with getting the Pakistani military and the government and their military to cooperate and coordinate with U.S. ISAF operations along the Green Line, along the Durand Line, for stopping the infiltration and exfiltration of the Quetta Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Because frankly, many members of the Pakistani military, I'm not saying the officer corps, I'm not saying not the officer corps, but I'm saying the enlisted corps, the enlisted soldiers, you're asking these folks to go against Klan, right? You're asking these soldiers to go against kin-based relationships that, again, go very deep, enduring. That's where legitimacy lies, and they're 3,000, 6,000 years long, right? That's a complication that, I told you I was gonna darken the room a little bit more. That one's a real that's a real concern of mine, because we could actually start to now put our really weird dark hat on and run scenarios. And now what Joe lays out with, elements like Lashkar al-Taiba that are trying to trigger through a spectacular attack, trigger a response, a reaction, even the slightest by India, that triggers a mobilization of these pentomic divisions of tactical nuclear weapons. They bring them out. The concern, of course, is that then makes them accessible by these terrorist organizations. But you could easily see large sectors, segments, pockets of the army itself facilitating these transfers, right? So we've got an even greater complication with the institutions that we, from our perspective, particularly from an American civil-military relationship, we may just all of us in the room here may just assume that, well, that's kind of a subordination of the military to civilian authority, right? Wrong answer. I mean, that is not necessarily the case. Let me end with a couple of what to expect and what to look for. The story of what to expect and what to look for is already happening. I'll start with us, the United States and our military in particular. We are building down and we are building out of heavy, protracted, boots-on-the-ground type of operations, what you have come to know and love and hate as COIN, counterinsurgency. We're building out of that, right? We're building down and out of that, and certainly building down and out of Afghanistan. It's an interesting and a very important question of what are the implications for regarding Pakistan with our build down in Afghanistan, right? Can't resist it any longer. Can't read my own writing.
Good. You look good, man.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Oh, the traumas. Expect to see more, not less, extraterritorial uses of drone strikes and special operation force raids. This is going to be the manner in which we try to contain and manage a very unmanageable situation, particularly as we build down and build out of heavy boots on the ground presence. And again, if you remember how I started, non-permissive environment in Pakistan anyway. So the non-permissiveness of that environment shapes and defines what technical and tactical approaches are left at your disposal to reach out and actually affect the situation. And so expect not less but more of the use of drones in special operation raids. As a weird 21st century kind of approach to attempt to containment, but that's really what we're already starting to see. What I hoped happens actually is an increase from the U.S. and international community side to pressure the Pakistani government and the military through conditional aid. We do have a lot of leverage through the aid packages that we give to Pakistan. And then, we should reflect back on the efforts of Senators Kerry and Lugar in the Kerry-Lugar Act, specifically looking to put conditions on the aid given to Pakistan. That is a leverage. It's kind of, if you guys remember, if any of you were in my talk on Monday, it's kind of like that garden hose. You provide it. If you command a hose, you can open it, but you can also restrict it, and that is a way of, in a soft and smart power kind of way, compelling particular changes in behavior of the Pakistani government and its military. I'm a big fan of experimenting with those smart approaches to use of the aid packages that we're giving. Maybe you don't realize it, but we for years, probably 40 years, we have been, a majority of the top military brass in Pakistan actually are educated in our Command and General Staff colleges here in the United States and our war colleges. I actually went to school with several of the officers that are colonels and some of which are generals in Pakistan now. At Command and General Staff College as a major and as a lieutenant colonel at the War College. The effort, that attempt is to try to grow into the Pakistani officer corps, the top brass, a sense of subordination of military to civilian authority, to build in this sense of discipline as we know it, right? Hit or miss, and we're kind of holding our breath to see how that plays out. We're certainly holding our breath and trying to see how that plays out. We're getting very negative responses so far in how that's turning out in our efforts with Egypt, in the Egyptian military. I fear that we may be facing the same kind of brittle disappointments in our investments turning stale with the Pakistani military because of all these internal complications, particularly its thin control over its own soldier corps. But I'm hopeful that maybe we can actually use that as a leverage also to, again, compel through smart power, indirect methods to compel the Pakistani officer corps to move in a more progressive and promotive and less threatening direction. And then my last hope is that all this complication, the one thing that this most dangerous country in the world, in the one right next door, this AFPAC complication presents to not only us, but all the other regional powers is a common puzzle and a common problem. And I do believe that there may be opportunity in this darkness to actually open up and build relationships, open up dialogues with all the regional players, including Iran, because we all face the same type of dramatic negative impacts if this thing unravels further. And so there may be opportunity in the darkness to use that dark puzzle to bring other players together to come up with some common practices. So I'll leave it at that. I think that's enough to scare the heck out of all of us, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. With all the information you must have some reflections on each other's statements. Would you like to air those?
In fact, if I may jump right in.
Please disagree with me, because we've been agreeing all day.
Well, actually, I was just about to almost agree with you again.
You guys speak right into it.
Okay, I was just about to almost agree with you again, Ike.
Okay.
But I will push back on a couple of things.
Good.
You know, sort of the general tenor of the conversation seems to be that the United States is finally getting serious about Pakistan. But I would question that, or at least I would ask for elaboration.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important decisions in recent years was the decision to create a special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, the SRAP. It was first Holbrooke, and I guess the new guy is McDonough. Yeah. And even implicit in that is a lack of seriousness of purpose, that it would have been logical to have a special representative for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, because that is the whole problem.
Absolutely.
We're not looking at the whole problem even now.
Yeah.
And we have to start. Relating to that is we have and continue to uncritically give Pakistan huge amounts of military assistance. And I, for one, as the outsider, non-expert on this particular issue, have never heard a credible argument as to why we are continuing to give Pakistan substantial amounts of money when there is credible evidence that Pakistan has been arming and supporting our enemies in Afghanistan. Now, changing gears a little bit, I absolutely agree that trade is one of the bright spots, that there is movement in a very positive direction on India-Pakistan trade. I've been fortunate enough the last year to be involved with the TAPI talks, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline talks, the objective of which is to connect the gas fields of Central Asia with the markets of India and Pakistan across Afghan territory. And I just, on a personal note, I think it's so interesting to watch the Indian and Pakistani delegations interact with one another, because they themselves show such commonalities of interest and culture, and also curiosity about what's going on the other side of the fence, and a lot of bureaucratic commonalities as well. I mean, you get them in a room together complaining about their respective bureaucracies, and you really see possibilities here, quite apart from the economic interests. But that said, there's a negative to this as well. We're talking about the elite of Pakistan. And as I mentioned in my previous anecdote, I've been to a lot of pretty rough places, and one of the things that struck me about Pakistan on a cultural level that I found quite disturbing was the extraordinary disconnect between elites and non-elites in Pakistan, in a way that I've seen in very few other places, where the ruling 5%, they don't even speak the same language as the rest of the country, never mind have any common reference points, common interests, common anything. And this, it's stark contrast to Afghanistan, which is not exactly, a Jeffersonian democracy in its own right. But you do, if you spend any significant amount of time in Afghanistan, you you do sense there's a certain social solidarity, at least I've found a certain social solidarity within ethnic groups and at times across ethnic groups as well, and a certain pride in person that you will find even at the very humble levels of Afghan society. And I find this social discontinuity one of the most troubling things among many other troubling things about Pakistan.
Okay. Let me,
Yeah.
let me
You
take a
wanna-
shot.
Want me to take the first one? I'll speak to the foreign military sales
Okay.
piece just
Okay,
real
go.
quick. To Phil's point on the foreign military sales and trying to find a rationality to this irrational, why do we keep giving this aid packages to Pakistan when we have evidence that they're complicit in all the puzzle making? I did my dissertation a long time ago on foreign military sales, so that's, and I don't think I hope my wife's not in the room, but I actually may be going over to Pakistan to work this foreign military sales stuff this summer for a little bit. So hopefully nobody tell her. But a simple answer, not the full answer, but a simple answer to this is because we give aid packages to India. And because we give similar aid packages, foreign military sales aid packages, and foreign military financing packages to India. And so it's a zero-sum calculation, right? If you give to one, you got to give to the other. And so there's almost kind of like an arms race, literally and figuratively. It's an arms race through these military aid packages, right? So that's the partial answer to that one.
Okay. Let me add a couple of things. There's so much to say on this subject that we will try your patience. But let me say there's several things I think we could be doing in addition to trade to make the situation better. And the first has to do with the war in Afghanistan. It was just pointed out that the major reason we're in Afghanistan is Pakistan. And this quickly became apparent. The idea was that after routing al-Qaeda and finding out that al-Qaeda was now nesting with other radical groups in Pakistan, and we're starting to direct their attention against Pakistan, we started going after them both to finish the job of dismantling the al-Qaeda network and to get rid of this radical influence that was destabilizing the area. The problem is, in the process of doing that, we've destabilized Pakistan more. Yep. And it has to do with the drone attacks, which are extremely effective counter-terrorist tactics. And there's a reason why we've been increasing these. Mm-hmm. I mean, we really are able to pick off the leaders of the terrorist organizations in a way that have few, in fact, close to zero American casualties in doing this. The problem is there were Pakistani civilian casualties in doing this, or in some cases, Afghanistan civilian casualties, and it has inflamed the Pakistan public against us, which already didn't like us. Yeah. But if you do polls, the Iranian people have a higher opinion of America than the Pakistani people do.
Seriously.
I mean, we're like at 11% in Pakistan. Yeah. 11%. More, well. And you see this. If you just pay attention, next time there's a funeral, just look at the photographs of the funeral. Look how many people are coming out, how upset they are, how angry they are. A colleague here in the audience just pointed out to me a news from today that the Pakistani parliament has issued new guidelines for improved relations, stabilizing and improving relations between the U.S. and Pakistan. The number one point, stop the drone attacks. Stop the drone attacks. Now, this is complicated because the Pakistani military kind of gives us permission, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, to go do it and then denounce them publicly. And this is true. Mm-hmm. But it's the impact on the public, which is why I was so impressed last year, and some of you may have heard me say this when I heard the former Director of National Intelligence and former Commander of the Pacific Command, Denny Blair, whose job it was to go kill terrorists, say we got to stop the drone attacks. Mm-hmm. They're causing more harm than good. So I think the number one thing we can do is really stop the drone attacks. And the second most important thing we can do is get out of Afghanistan. It is time to end that Afghanistan war, wind it down, bring all the troops home. I really, it has become a major distortion in our Pakistan. It's partially because what Phil said, this creation of the AFPAC formulation means that when our top State Department, Defense, National Security staff come to talk about these issues, they cluster in the Pakistan-Afghanistan group. And the people who do India aren't in that group. The people who do China aren't in that group. They're in another group. And this is crazy. And I'm now confronting this. We have a bureaucratic problem we have to fix. And one of my central recommendations to the Department of State is disband the AFBAC. You've got to treat this as a regional problem involving all the regional countries, and this includes Iran.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you said, and this, we have got, one of the reasons it's in our strategic interest to end this conflict over the nuclear issue with Iran is because we need Iran's help to stabilize Afghanistan. We need Iran's help in the overall regional development of this area. This is where the future is. This is where the money goes. It's in regional cooperation. This is where the pipelines go. This is where the oil routes go. You've got to see this as a regional problem, not a terrorist problem, not an AFPAC problem. And therefore, we have to start reforming our aid tools. And you're seeing this a little in the Kerry Lugar Act. You're starting to see the U.S. change the ratio, more economic aid as part of that aid package. And I'm also in favor of decreasing, and this is really hard to do because you don't want to lose the Pakistan military, but you've got to start the process of supporting them with $2 billion of aid a year. You've got to start drawing that down, putting more conditions on it, making sure the economic aid goes where it's supposed to go, and not to feed the coffers of the corporate military. It turns out the military runs about, I don't know, a third to a half,
At least a third.
of the Pakistan economy.
Yeah.
So you have to have policies that will wean that away too. What we're talking about, this is going to take, in the short run, getting out of Afghanistan, years. In the long run, changing this relationship, decades. But you've got to have this new policy. You've got to have this new orientation, or it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Pakistan will turn from a major non-NATO ally to our worst nuclear nightmare overnight.
I'll just real quickly add the pipeline. Great, as Phil lays out, great opportunity there. Again, it's a common puzzle that brings people together on different incentive issues. I mean, good business is good, and everybody benefits from that. You can actually develop some effective relationships. But if we don't get this, what Joe's talking about, this overall regional, collective process around this trade development with the pipeline, again, I'm putting on my military strategist hat. Now we'll have a pipeline that the terrorist organizations like Lashkar al-Taiba, they will interdict that. Because it's exactly what I would do if I was the enemy, right? They will hit that, and we will have given them literally the hose in thousands of miles of pipeline that will be interdicted every single day to incite this someone pulling the trigger, someone blinking and someone pulling the trigger and playing, or mixed metaphors here, playing chicken and nobody turning off the road in a collision course. So.
Any further discussion?
On that happy note.
On panelists? You had enough?
Yeah, I don't know.
I had mentioned that we would have microphones for the questions. I don't see them there.
Right up front, right on the
All right. Oh, there's one's right here and one's right there. Students first. I see a student, a young student.
This is gonna be the hardest question of the day. I know. Oh yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering about internal Pakistani politics. After the Osama bin Laden raid, Pakistan condemned it and arrested the people who tipped off the U.S. And so, how can we get the Pakistani government to ally with us more when they have to play to the America-hating public?
That's great. Great question. Yeah, terrific.
All right. There's a challenge for you.
Golly.
Who'd like to take that?
Wow.
That's a
Joe?
great one for Joe.
Yeah.
Part of it has to do with not continuing to reward Pakistan for their non-cooperation with the United States. So part of it is withholding, reducing American military aid, and not continuing to let them blackmail us. I really do believe this. I think we're being played for a sucker here. Part of it is the kind of stuff that my colleagues know all about. There are a lot of strong personal relationships between the United States and the Pakistani military that have to be fostered, not just because many of them were trained here. And it's the reason you constantly see the chairman or the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs going over to Pakistan, talking there, showing respect for them, and cultivating those kind of personal relationships. Part of it is having a little thicker skin, and we understand the Pakistani have to play this game. They denounce us publicly, they cooperate with us privately. But all of this is all going to be surfaced until you change the underlying strategic dynamics, and that, I think, is the larger picture we've been talking about. The U.S. getting out of Afghanistan, developing a regional approach, fundamentally continue to improve and solidify the Indian-Pakistan relationships, working the issue of Kashmir, not that you're going to solve that soon, but showing that you're continually concerned about it. There's a long list of these things, but you just got to keep working these issues, working these problems.
Actually, I will add to that part of defusing the situation, as my colleagues have mentioned, is the drawdown of U.S. forces from Afghanistan for yet another reason, that Pakistan has for a number of years now had a chokehold, effectively, on U.S. forces in Afghanistan, in that the port of Karachi and the roads between the port and the Afghan border are the principal corridors for resupply for U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. And whenever things get bad between the U.S. and Pakistan, the Pakistanis close the border for a little while and everything stops. You know, we've all heard about the legendary 20-mile-long traffic jams of oil tankers stretching back from the Afghan border, because that's what it takes to run a modern military operation in Afghanistan right now. Now, to a certain extent, that chokehold is going to exist even after U.S. forces leave, because the Afghan army is going to be taking on some of those roles and is going to be consuming supplies in a similar fashion, although not as expansively, I think, as U.S. forces will. And this comes back to part of the need for a true regional strategy for very, very prosaic logistical reasons, that the Afghans do not want to be beholden to Pakistani supply corridors for their economic livelihood, for their military resupply, for things like that. I mean, it should be coming from the north. Frankly, Iran, the Iranian border might even be a source of resupply, not for the United States perhaps, but for Afghanistan. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, from over here.
Well, Pakistan seems to see Afghanistan as a bulwark against India and a source for radical terrorists to fight, if I'm not mistaken, particularly in Kashmir. India seems to see Pakistan as a bulwark, or Afghanistan as a bulwark against Pakistan, and if I'm not mistaken, is investing heavily in Afghanistan right now. Why is it that we have not seen high-level concerted efforts to resolve the Pakistan-India crisis, particularly with regard to Kashmir, on the level that we have seen with, say, Israel-Palestine?
I don't know.
Yeah.
You got that?
I would ask the same question.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question.
Okay,
I don't
well,
know.
I'll tell you. There's two reasons, and one is the simple one, which is this Kashmir is really hard, and in order to solve that, you've got to have a willingness of the two partners to actually want a compromise solution, and neither India nor Pakistan has wanted a compromise solution. That is actually changing now. Kashmir has not been a flashpoint between India and Pakistan for years now. You actually see the softening of the position. So we might now be in the position to go back to this. But frankly, the other goes to the way U.S. strategic interests, the way the U.S. prioritizes its strategic interest. And so you always have this conflict inside our own government about what we're going to push and why are we pushing it. And it's often, in terms in the State Department, it's got the regional issues versus the functional issues. The functional issues are things like human rights, women's rights, labor rights, nuclear nonproliferation. The regional issues are the state-to-state relation and why you need that state to carry out your broader geostrategic aims. And under both Republican and Democratic administrations, Pakistan has been important for these other geostrategic reasons. So we look the other way on democracy. We look the other way on the Pakistani nuclear program because we needed Pakistan to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan, or we needed the Pakistanis to get al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. So we needed them so much, and so therefore you didn't want to antagonize that relationship by going after a sore point for them, which was Kashmir. And so you have an historic problem for this. It's proved when you ignore these problems, when you put these problems as second level, they come back to bite you. I mean, the problem there is not, we should have had a more vibrant democracy in Pakistan now than we had, and we would have if we had paid more attention to it. We didn't have to end up with a nuclear program like this in Pakistan if we had paid more attention to it. I believe we could have resolved the Kashmir problem if we hadn't continued to put it on the back burner.
Thank you.
One concern I have with the Kashmir issue, and it ties back to Afghanistan. Even if I have an opinion on whether it's good or not for the build down and out of U.S. forces and ISAF forces from Afghanistan is irrelevant, and it's improper. It would be improper for me to share that even if I had an opinion. So I think I've left you enough appropriately in the dark on that one as a military guy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I danced a little sidestep on that one. That's good. That's what I have to do to survive. Kind of like Pakistan and Afghanistan. But one concern I do have in terms of a consequence, an unintended consequence of drawing down and building out of Afghanistan, the Kashmir issue is more of an existential issue and threat and problem between Pakistan and India. What Afghanistan over the last 10 years has provided them is another less existential place and space and problem to dance with one another over. With the U.S. in the middle of it, kind of in an interesting and indirect way, kind of managing that interaction. With our withdrawal, one concern I do have is that then takes the intermediator out of the mix to a certain degree. It may open up the space for India and Pakistan to get back to the old, more existential game, the more brittle game of questions over Kashmir. And so I think we have to be, in my calculations, I would still say that with that in mind, still the direction we seem to be taking towards a withdrawal by 2014. But you do have to make those calculations in terms of the unintended consequences, and that could be one of them.
Thank you for very substantive answers. At that rate, we ought to have time for 2 more questions. Yeah. Settle in.
Thank you. I was in Pakistan for a month in the tribal areas. I was there when Prime Minister Bhutto was arrested.
Can you speak up a little bit, get the microphone closer?
And if you look at the cover of our Conference on World Affairs, this is our 64th one. That's also the age of Pakistan. Mm-hmm. It started in 1948. Gandhi once said, I'll get rid of the British, but I'm not going to be able to get rid of the caste system. And to a sense, my question is, you're talking about pipelines, and I agree with the pipelines, but I'm not hearing, and I haven't, not just in this room, I'd like to roll the dice, and what do you think of the idea of a pipeline that goes from Iran south of Quetta directly into India through Pakistan? Thank you.
I don't have any knowledge of that.
I honestly don't either.
Sorry.
I'll have to think about that one. Actually, you know, there are interesting economic possibilities if you put Iran into the picture. And this is, in fact, one of the things that the United States has persistently not done because of our other problems with Iran. But if you really do look at the region, as it has historically functioned, you need to have Iran in there. You need to have the stands in there. You need to have India in there. You need to have China in there. When you start looking at the region as a region, the possibilities start to unfold. And this is one example of a possibility that could unfold if we look at the region as a region. I mean, one of the things that always kind of irritates me is when people start talking about 1,000 years of hatred or 1,000 years of ethnic conflict or whatever. And absolutely, there is a long history of ethnic conflict and interreligious hatred and intercommunal violence in this region. But there have also been extraordinary periods of peace and prosperity in this region as well. This is the Silk Road that we're talking about. And the Silk Road, for great stretches of human history, has been a source of wealth and prosperity for everyone along that road and on both ends. And I think one of the recent State Department initiatives that deserves support and encouragement is the so-called New Silk Road Initiative, which is part of the longer-term vision for Afghanistan and the region, so long as it's not viewed as a way to get out of Afghanistan quick and cheaply.
This gentleman over here.
Thank you for your time. My question lies, if there are ties between the Pakistani military, the ISI, and also the Taliban, are those ties remnants from the relationship between the ISI and the old leadership of the Mujahideen?
Yes. I mean, it's an excellent question. It's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. Yes.
Yeah, see, the Pakistani military looks at these groups as part of its asymmetrical capabilities against India. I mean, we mentioned before, India has a conventional military superiority over Pakistan. How do you confront that if you're Pakistan? One is nuclear weapons, and the other is asymmetric warfare. And it's these kinds of groups, these kinds of disruptions that they see as an asset.
Thank you.
And so that you know, they're not going to give them up. No. As much as we want, as much as they're anti-American, forget it. They're not going to give them up.
We have about 5 minutes left for questions. This gentleman.
Oh, a student.
Do you want to speed round? You want to speed round the question?
It's a real live student.
Yeah.
Could just collect the questions. Maybe speed round it since we only have 5 minutes. Just collect the questions.
We'll take
All
those.
right. You pose your question. You pose your question. We'll see if we can address them both then.
Yeah.
Get an efficient here.
It's been mentioned a couple times. I was wondering if anyone would take a moment to talk about the motivations and interests of China in all of this.
Could you understand that?
China interests?
Yeah.
Just their role in the whole puzzle of Pakistan.
All right. This gentleman.
That's a great question. That's very close to my question. My understanding is that China and Pakistan have been close friends for many decades, and that China was the people responsible for first supplying a nuclear program to Pakistan. And my question is, given that Pakistan and China are both sort of enemies of India, what is it in China's mind that they're thinking here by giving nuclear weapons and support to Pakistan and having Pakistan, a very unstable country with nuclear weapons now, on their border? Is this something that the Chinese are going to be happy about someday, and are they trying to do anything in the region?
Yeah. Let me just be real quick about this. China's interest used to be very clear, especially during the Cold War. It was real clear. The Soviet Union was an adversary for China. Remember, Sino-Soviet split over this? The Soviet Union was the main ally of India. The Soviet Union was supplying the arms to India. All the Indian Armed Force was equipped with all Soviet technology. China sought to balance that, to blunt that by aiding Pakistan, including by giving Pakistan its first nuclear design and helping Pakistan develop its nuclear program. The U.S. Tried to have a balancing act, tried to do both, but its main interest in Pakistan at that point was also to balance off against the Soviet relationship with India. It's not so clear anymore. India clearly sees China as a rival. It's not so clear that China sees India that way anymore. So and Pakistan's value to China is waning. It just isn't a it doesn't have that same strategic weight as it used to have during the Cold War.
I would add to that China, I believe, has a strong interest in access to the resources of Central Asia.
Yes.
That the Chinese have put a lot of money into developing infrastructure in both the west of China and in the stands.
Yes.
China has scored a sweet deal on natural gas with the Turkmen, well below the price that perhaps the Turkmen could have commanded, and I often wonder how that came about. And the Chinese have been very forward in trying to secure mineral rights in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's just you got to pay attention to this stuff because it's kind of stuff we're not used to. Who studied economics? But as it turns out,
Not me. I was an English major, but I somehow managed to figure this out.
so the Chinese are really interested in Karachi. They want a southern port that they could transport their goods to. Same in Burma. They're interested in that southern port that Burma could provide. So a lot of these interests, it's not really sort of geopolitical or rivalries the way it's booked. It's more economic. And so what are the conditions that would allow China to realize that access, and how does that play in resolving some of these conflicts and tensions, or is it producing greater conflicts and tensions?
Go back and read The Great Game.
Yeah, the great game.
All
And
right.
by the way, this helps explain some of the U.S.'s interest in Burma. You think it's all about promoting democracy? Yes, yes, yes. But it's also about blunting that Chinese influence in Burma.
You bet.
One question, last question.
Would there be a basis for an economic common market in that region? And would that help resolve some of these issues?
We're a long way away from that.
From your mouth to God's ear, please. Let's do it.
I mean, logically, yes, but... And so what you see is people starting to approach it. India and Pakistan are actually involved in reforming the customs regulations and loosening up the tariffs, and that's the kind of thing you're starting to see happen. But a common market, we're a long way from that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.